In front of us, we have the Plan 2035 implementation package presentation. I think we got Mr. Feltz and Ms. Scholars. I'll turn to Ms. Hightower for an overview.
Chair, there's not much of an overview. We have Ms. Katina Scholars, the Division Chief for the Countywide Planning, and Mr. Tony Feltz, the Division Chief for the Community Planning. And they're going to go over, we'll give a briefing on incentivizing development areas and Plan 2035 centers and inside the Beltway. And I'll turn it over to them. Thank you.
Well, good morning. It looks like it's still 2 minutes in morning, so I'll say good morning. So good morning, Chair Denoga, and members of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. Again, my name is Tony Feltz, and I am the Chief of Community Planning with the Prince George's County Planning Department. As mentioned, I'm joined today by Katina Scholars, Chief of Countywide Planning, Adam Dodgson, the Supervisor of the Community Planning Division's Placemaking Section, our Director, Lakeisha Hall, and our Deputy Director, Derek Berlage. You'll remember that we appeared before this committee on January 18th of this year to provide a broad overview of a package of implementation strategies that the Planning Department will be working on in the coming year to further the goals of Plan 2035. At that briefing, we let you know that we would come back to this committee to go into more detail for strategies related to growth inside the centers in the Capital Beltway and outside centers in the Capital Beltway. The briefing today is related to strategies related to growth inside the centers and inside the Beltway, and in this presentation you will hear a lot about how to make the kind of transit-oriented and infill development envisioned in Plan 2035 easier and more desirable to build. So kind of think the right development in the right places. And remember that we'll be back next month at this committee to discuss additional guardrails and safeguards that can be put into place to help manage growth outside the Beltway and outside centers. So let's start off like I always like to do with a reminder about Plan 2035. You'll remember that the key takeaway from your Plan 2035, which was adopted by the County Council in 2014 and which, as you know, sets the county's vision and growth policy, is that the County Council, in adopting Plan 2035, approved a fundamental shift in the county's development pattern away from auto-dependent suburban sprawl and toward pedestrian and transit-friendly mixed-use centers. And what can we do to keep moving in the right direction? We're focusing on 4 areas: right-size zoning, incentives for in-center development, managing growth outside the centers, and providing housing for all. And as you know, zoning is the source from where approvals for new development come. Without proper zoning and regulations in place, the county cannot effectively manage growth. And as you know, zoning itself stems from Plan 2035 and the master and sector plans that complement the plan. That's why the Planning Department is going to propose funding to fully evaluate the county's 38 master and sector plans to see what is working, what isn't working, what is and is not appropriate and complementary to Plan 2035, because, as you know, many of these plans predate Plan 2035's adoption. We anticipate that this review will lead to opportunities to initiate plan amendments and possible zoning changes to right-size zoning in the county and ensure that proper zoning designations are in place on a plan-by-plan level. In addition, the Planning Department is continuing to develop new plans which include sectional map amendments, which are comprehensive rezonings associated with adopted plans, to ensure that the right zoning is in place. But it's worth mentioning that it's not enough just to have the right zones in place. It's also important that the regulations tied to those zones match the goals of Plan 2035. The next few slides are going to focus on proposed by-right density increases in the centers. These centers have special zoning districts referred to as transit-oriented activity center-based zones. The Planning Department is proposing, as part of the Omnibus Bill, to increase by-right densities in these very specialized districts in order to bring the densities in these districts more in line with Plan 2035's vision of transit-oriented development. But numbers on a slide don't really tell the story. The next few slides are going to give some conceptual examples of what these densities could mean for buildings on the ground. So at 80 to 95 units per acre, one would expect to see about a 5-story building with some ground level retail. These types of buildings are typically wood framed and wrapped around a central garage structure. This would be some of the lowest maximum densities in the transit-oriented and activity centers under the proposed omnibus bill. At 90 to 110 dwelling units per acre, you would expect to see 4 or 5 stories of residential on top of a podium garage. And what a podium garage just really means is a ground level garage that typically covers a full floor and is sometimes wrapped with retail or restaurant spaces below the residential units, so it covers the entirety of that first floor. The difference from the previous example is that the podium garage allows additional residential units on parts of the parcel that would be taken up by a central garage. These types of buildings are still wood frame. Again, they would incorporate commercial space on the first floors. At 125 to 150 units per acre, you start to get more into mid-rise buildings with 7 or 8 stories typical. These buildings are typically metal framed or concrete and incorporate a multi-level parking garage directly beneath the housing units and incorporate commercial spaces at ground level. This level of density is efficient for smaller sites in transit areas. And at 150 units per acre and above, you would expect to see high-rise, steel, concrete, or mass timber construction in very dense and urban locations. Those areas immediately adjacent to transit stations and construction is designed in such a way as to allow for maximum density. These are typically really expensive to construct due to code and structural requirements and the requirements to use steel, concrete, or mass timber. But these images are really conceptual, so I wanted to give you some real-world examples here in Prince George's County. Number 1, at 101 dwelling units per acre, is Ascend Apollo. It's right down the road from us here on Lotsford Road in Largo. Number 2 is University View 1 at 112 units per acre, and University View 2 at 194 units per acre in College Park. And number 3, Landmark, is also in College Park at 109 units per acre. So hopefully these representative images will give you an idea of the type of development envisioned for the county's most important land use asset, its transit stations. But having the right zoning districts and the right zoning regulations in place is, of course, just part of the equation. Now we're going to look at the other part of the equation, incentives and other policies to encourage and direct growth to the centers. These include prioritizing specific capital projects, eliminating and streamlining the DSP process for in-center projects, modifications to level of service inside centers, which Katina will talk about. She'll also talk about impact fees for developments that are inside the Beltway. And we'll also explore options to diversify housing options and preserve affordability inside the Beltway. So let's begin with those CIP projects. Scott Rowe from Community Planning presented this information to the council on March 19th, so I'll briefly recap this content since I think most of you have heard it before. And I want to mention that CIP recommendations are planned to occur from the Planning Department annually. To identify and prioritize key capital projects to advance the goals, policies, and recommendations of Plan 2035, we must first evaluate recommendations in the master and sector plans that govern growth and development in the downtown and innovation corridor. Second, we have to go to the downtowns and innovation corridor and see the needs with our own eyes. And we must then coordinate with partner agencies to identify what projects they are undertaking or considering and how these projects can best implement Plan 2035. I want to recap those priority capital projects that the Planning Board recommended to the county, state, and other agencies to undertake to continue to build on the momentum already generated for Plan 2035 implementation. First are 2 recommendations that are needed in all the downtowns and innovation corridors. One is comprehensive branding and wayfinding program for each downtown. Everyone who visits that place needs to know that they are in a special important place within Prince George's County, and they should know how to get around this place, whether on foot, on bicycle, or in a car. Second is that the entire county needs high-quality bus stops. These are bus stops that make waiting for, getting on, or getting off a bus a pleasant experience, demonstrating that the county values bus passengers who do so much to not add to congestion that drivers create. Good bus stops include distinctive shelters made of durable materials, real-time electronic arrival and departure information, seating, protection from weather, bicycle racks and docking stations, trash receptacles, paved pedestrian access, crosswalks within a block, and on those hard roof shelters, green roofing for biodiversity and heat island reduction. Right here in Largo, in downtown Largo, the key capital investments focus on creating a real place that people want to live, work, visit, learn, and recreate. Retrofitting our suburban road network to an interconnected network of complete and green streets is one of the most critical steps Prince George's County can take to increase our economic competitiveness versus neighboring jurisdictions, many of whom invested in complete streets retrofits many years ago. Social interaction, public enjoyment, and economic activity all occur on the street, much more than a mobility need. A complete streets retrofit is critical to creating places where people want to be. Accordingly, the first priority projects in downtown Largo are a transformation of its road network, which was constructed to funnel cars in and out of the old Capital Center into a safe, attractive network of complete and green streets where people can walk, bike, take transit, or drive to their destinations safely and comfortably. Key to successful placemaking is creating attractive public open spaces for people to gather. In addition to the ongoing effort to create a civic plaza here at the Wayne K. Curry Administration Building, the hospital, the metro station, and Lake Largo are 3 other locations where creating great public spaces will attract people to the area. And finally, constructing an amphitheater for downtown Largo is a major investment that will bring hundreds of thousands of people per year and national attention to downtown Largo, and increased demand for eating, dining, and ancillary entertainment options in Largo. Other investments in downtown Largo that can increase its marketability for new investment, but also improve circulation and amenities for workers, visitors, and residents are a series of trail connections. Most importantly, the Central Avenue Connector Trail that will connect downtown Largo with Seat Pleasant, Capitol Heights, and the district. Finally, multimodal improvements to the Medical Center Drive Capital Beltway interchange are critical to connecting communities west of the Capital Beltway and downtown Largo. And next we move on to New Carrollton, where 2 major infrastructure investments are underway that will fully unlock this downtown's potential. A new intermodal station that will serve as a gateway to Prince George's County and seamlessly connect riders on Amtrak, MARC, Metro, and the Purple Line, as well as intercity and local buses with connections throughout the region and destinations within this growing neighborhood. Retrofitting 85th Avenue and Ellen Road, or Maryland 433, to better support pedestrian and bicycle activity are key to connecting New Carrollton with Annapolis Road, which is Maryland 450, and the broader city of New Carrollton. Increasing New Carrollton's attractiveness as a live, work, play destination starts with improved public gathering spaces, and 2 locations where placemaking can be prioritized are at each end of Harkins Road, at Annapolis Road, and Ellen Road by the IRS headquarters. For New Carrollton and other planned 2035 centers along the Metro Rail Orange Line to maximize their potential, an upcoming restoration of the lower Beaver Dam Creek near New Carrollton Metro must be paired with additional green infrastructure solutions to turn stormwater management features into publicly accessible open space, and a comprehensive stormwater management study of the entire lower Beaver Dam Creek watershed. WMATA has been a key partner in developing the station area throughout its joint development program, and it should continue to partner with other public agencies who own land at New Carrollton to maximize development opportunities walking distance to the station. At Suitland, it is a living example of the power of public investment and unlocking private investments in places where the private real estate market has ignored for decades. Continued investment in the town square at Suitland Federal Center creates an in-high-demand urban neighborhood walking distance to the metro and thousands of jobs at Suitland Federal Center. A critical next step is retrofitting Maryland 458, which is Silver Hill Road, to better support transit, bicycling, and walking along Maryland 218, Suitland Road, and Swan Road. A long-discussed investment that will build upon the momentum of Town Square is the creation of a formal civic open space at the intersection of Silver Hill Road and Suitland Road. Placemaking Suitland showed us that the possibilities and demand for civic spaces and improving this place not only gives residents of Suitland a place they can proudly gather and call their own, but tells those who would reinvest in this area that Prince George's County is serious about investing in great public spaces. The next downtown is Hyattsville Crossing. You'll begin to notice some themes in these recommendations because they are foundational investments critical to creating a baseline environment that supports private investment and reinvestment in these communities. As with other downtowns, retrofitting the main streets to complete and green streets has to be a priority. Bellcrest Road and East-West Highway continue to serve as barriers to create the type of walkable, mixed-use, attractive neighborhood that Plan 2035 envisions, and need to be transformed into human-scale main streets. Stormwater management is also key to unlocking the potential of Hyattsville Crossing. The ongoing 9-Pond project was a key recommendation of the 2016 Prince George's Plaza Transit District Development Plan, and its completion in the coming months will address current and future storm runoff emanating from areas of Hyattsville Crossing that were constructed prior to modern stormwater management practices and alleviate flooding downstream on the east side of the transit district. A key next step is doing the same type of studies, evaluation, and potentially a similar facility on the west side of the transit district to alleviate stormwater volumes in the northwest branch of the Anacostia River, which could in turn decrease flooding risks surrounding the West Hyattsville station downriver. Finally, creating public open spaces where people can safely gather and interact is key to attracting investor interest and improving quality of life. There are 2 existing plazas that were created with this purpose in mind, but are not living up to their potential: the Metro Station and in the middle of University Town Center at America Boulevard and Freedom Way. Reinvestment in these areas can enliven them and create civic focal points. The county's innovation corridor includes major national research and development institutions and 2 regional transit districts, the College Park UMD and Greenbelt Metro stations. 2 transportation investments are critical to maximizing the possibilities in this area: completing the Purple Line, which will connect students, employers, and employees throughout the corridor, and completing the interchange on the Beltway at the Greenbelt Metro Station, which would be necessary even if it weren't absolutely critical to support the redevelopment of that station anchored by the new FBI headquarters. As with downtowns, addressing stormwater management in the innovation corridor is a necessary step to ensuring that growth occurs in an environmentally sensitive manner, and that the historic lack of stormwater management in the corridor is overcome with new facilities that use best stormwater management practices to create ecologically sound areas that are an asset as well as a necessity to new neighborhoods. In particular, building the Urban Conservation Park recommended in the 2015 College Park Riverdale Park Transit District Development Plan can create an amenity for current and future students, workers, and residents, while helping manage stormwater in the very sensitive Paint Branch and Northeast Branch watersheds. Retrofitting main streets again appears as an important strategy to provide existing residents, students, and workers with safe multimodal access to their destinations, and also a prerequisite to attracting new and private investment. The City of Greenbelt and SHA have been exploring improvements to Greenbelt Road. Campus Drive is another road that lends itself to a transformation to a modern multimodal street. And finally, at Branch Avenue, the current road infrastructure inhibits safe travel, encourages high vehicle speeds, and serves as a barrier between the station area and new developments, such as the Customs and Immigration Service headquarters. Retrofitting Capital Gateway Drive, Auth Road, and Old Soper Road, and Auth Way will go a long way in connecting the station to the surrounding neighborhoods. Meanwhile, 2 major transit investments can create increased private investment at Branch Avenue. The existing surface parking lot is one of the prime locations in Prince George's County for transit-oriented development. Constructing a parking structure can free up a significant portion of this underutilized space for dense transit-oriented development. Continued investment in the Southern Maryland Regional Transit System has the potential to bring thousands of riders daily into the Branch Avenue station, increasing its attractiveness for retail, eating, drinking establishments, and other services targeted to customers and commuters. And so now we shift focus to streamlining the DSP process. So the Planning Department currently has an expedited review process for transit-oriented development adjacent to metro stations. This existing process shortens the time for projects to get to Planning Board from about 70 days to 60 days. But really, when you think about it, 10 days is not really enough incentive when you think about the life of a project, which can sometimes last for years. As such, we propose allowing simultaneous preliminary plan site plan review, which could shorten approval times from up to 200 days to as little as 100 days. We would like to consider eliminating district council call-up for specific transit-oriented developments in our regional transit centers, which could remove up to 30 days from the process, and reducing fees for simultaneous review. We believe that these small adjustments would have a greater impact on the approval process timeline in order to incentivize transit-oriented development. And with that, I'll turn it over to Katina to talk about transportation adequacy.
Good morning. My name is Katina Scholars, Division Chief of the Countywide Planning Division, and I'll be discussing transportation adequacy and fees associated with school and public safety. Historically, Prince George's County has been heavily dependent on mobility by vehicular transportation. The goal of Plan 2035 is to grow primarily in our transit-oriented centers to significantly reduce dependence on driving by creating more opportunities for walking, biking, and transit in high-density areas. This is what attracts businesses and turns urban centers into urban meccas. Younger generations prefer to live or work in areas with strong biking, walking, and transit infrastructure in place, as well as access to shopping, places to work, restaurants, entertainment, public spaces, health services, and a variety of other uses. Like many suburbanizing areas in the 1970s, Prince George's County instituted an adequate public facilities, or as we call it, APF ordinance. The idea behind APF ordinances is that development should not occur unless adequate infrastructure is in place to serve new and existing development. There are a few things you should consider when thinking about adequate public facilities. There is no scientific way to determine adequacy. It is a policy determination made by you, the County Council. An APF ordinance is effective only to the extent that it A, regulates whether development occurs or not, and B, is coordinated with jurisdiction's capital improvement program. Most existing APF ordinances, including ours, include a test for traffic adequacy that is only achievable in greenfield areas where land and money for road improvements are available. In Prince George's County, what constitutes adequate public facilities is established by the council in the subdivision regulations. When it comes to new development, public facilities adequacy is evaluated at the time of subdivision. And the intent of transportation APV test is to make sure that transportation facilities are or will be in place at the time of development to offset the impacts of added traffic from development. It is also to ensure that vehicular traffic will be operating at the established levels of adequacy in a given area of the county. However, in the centers, how fast vehicles can get through a block is less of a priority. Adding lanes in these centers encourages more vehicular traffic, especially for pass-through traffic and travel at high speeds. Allowing a higher level of service or more free-flowing traffic through centers will further discourage bike and pedestrian use by creating an unsafe environment. Prince George's County already leads the state and the region in pedestrian fatalities. Through the subdivision process, the level of service, or LOS as we refer to, is the common standard used for ensuring that needed infrastructure will be in place and operating to accommodate the new development. Each level is associated with a level of congestion that previous county councils found to be tolerable in a specific area of the county. Next slide, please. In the prior subdivision ordinance, 3 levels of service were established. Each one applied to a transportation service area, or TSA, which is a designated analysis area of the county for traffic conditions. And there are 3 transportation service areas in the county, as shown on this slide. TSA 3 is a rural and agricultural policy area of the county and has the highest of the county's established level of service. In this area, the traffic standard is to have a stable traffic flow at peak periods of the day. Transportation Service Area 2 is primarily between the US 301 and the Beltway, where more congestion is expected but tolerable at peak periods. And Transportation Service Area 1 is generally the area inside the Beltway and has the lowest level of service. And congestion is expected to be very high during peak periods. The current subdivision ordinance establishes 5 levels of service, or 5 levels of acceptable traffic conditions that apply to different areas of the county. The implementation of the current subdivision regulations allowed for all TOD centers to have the lowest level of service regardless of their location. This does not include the local town centers. In addition, zones RTO, LTO, and planned development zones were allowed to have an even lower level of service, meaning that these areas are allowed to have a much higher level of congestion than the rest of Transportation Service Area 1. For these zones, consideration is given to the focus of more and safer movement by walking, biking, and transit. Movement by vehicle is less of a priority. In summary, the current subdivision regulations has moved us toward lowering the county's acceptable level of service in centers. And this map right here, next slide. This map here shows the location of those LTO, RTO, and planned development zones that I mentioned, which have the lowest level of service standard. A majority of them are within TSA1 already. And I can provide you with an electronic copy if you want to take a closer look at that map. Next slide, please. When development is proposed, staff analyzes the development to determine how density will impact traffic and if the roads will operate at the intended level of service. If they will not, the applicant can meet adequacy the following ways. They can revise the proposal to reduce the amount of development. They can provide transportation improvements such as an added lane, a turn lane, additional signage. They can provide funding into a trip reduction program, fund transportation demand management program, or provide a fee in lieu to associated capital improvement program or benefit from a fully funded program. Next slide, please. So what are options the council can consider in the centers to incentivize development as it relates to transportation adequacy? One way is further lowering the level of service, and not in just those zones I mentioned, but in all transit-oriented development centers. Another is to eliminate level of service in all transit-oriented development centers. And here, prioritizing facilities for biking, walking, and transit, and slow traffic to safer speeds. It may or may not be necessary to require a TIS or a transportation impact study to be done so that the county continues to assess future traffic conditions. Developer-funded or built improvements could focus on transportation demand management strategies or additional multimodal options rather than simply adding a travel lane, which will attract more vehicles as alternative routes and unattract bikers and walkers. Another option is to identify legally acceptable traffic mitigation strategies and/or fees in lieu of adequacy-related improvements. And lastly, reduce parking maximums and encourage the use of waivers to parking maximums. These options can only be viewed as incentives when it is in a stark contrast to options outside of centers, and this will be discussed in future session. Lowering the dependency on cars and increasing ease and accessibility for biking and walking will create places for economic success. These are all issues that warrant further discussion and will be evaluated through Go Prince George's, the update to the county's master plan of transportation. Next slide. Thank you. Now I will move on to fees. Subject to the Land Use Code and also Subtitle 10 of the County Code, the county imposes a surcharge fee for public safety and schools to address impacts of new development on these services. Surcharge fees are per dwelling unit and paid at the time of building permit. For the public safety surcharge fee, the amount is $3,123 in Transportation Service Area 1 and $9,362 in all other areas. For the school surcharge, it's $11,560 inside the Beltway and $19,000 $826 in all other areas. These surcharge fees are not applicable to certain types of housing, such as student housing and senior housing. For the public facility surcharge, the fee can be waived for properties in TSA 1 near a transit station if it is part of a CSP or conceptual site plan. As you are aware, the county imposes a mitigation fee, and now I'll move on to mitigation fee for police and fire adequacy. The county can impose a mitigation fee for failing police and fire adequacy. For police adequacy, a mitigation fee may be assessed if it is found that the response time for police exceeds 10 minutes for emergency calls or 25 minutes for non-emergency calls. For fire, an impact fee is assessed if travel time from the fire station to the location of the emergency exceeds 7 minutes. These tests are only applied to residential developments at the time of subdivision. For police, that mitigation fee is $5,889, and for fire, it is $2,061. Next slide. With regard to options inside the transit-oriented centers as it relates to surcharge, there is a minimal flexibility. For the public safety surcharge, the council could consider expanding the waiver criteria for the public safety surcharge. However, for schools, no change is recommended. I have discussed this with Ms. Zavakis as well as our legal team, and there's very little that can be done at the county level. It would have to, it would mean amendments at the state level. For the mitigation fees for police and fire, you can reduce or eliminate the fee. This would require an update to the subdivision ordinance and the mitigation guidelines. So in conclusion, infrastructure is very critical to the success of any community. Reducing or eliminating infrastructure fees in centers can possibly attract more high-density residential development and mixed-use development. However, the fiscal impact of this should be further examined. For the county's transit-oriented centers, a majority of the necessary vehicular infrastructure is in place, and the envisioned density is expected to be accompanied by slower-moving vehicles that provide for safe pedestrian and bicycle movement. Bikeways and walkways connect people to opportunities, which attracts desired economic development. This should be the focus of these centers. I will now turn it back to Mr. Phelps.
Thanks, Katina. And just to close it out, it's important that we also continue to focus on redevelopment inside the Beltway, as we've discussed before. It's important for both this redevelopment to occur in such a way as to both preserve existing naturally occurring affordable housing, but also to allow for the expansion of housing choices, both in choice of housing type and price point. This type of housing choice is referred to sometimes as missing middle. The Planning Department is proposing to undertake a study to identify areas within the Capital Beltway and near centers where missing middle housing is most appropriate. The study will also focus on developing a regulatory framework that ensures compatibility with existing neighborhoods. And really the goal here is to allow maximum choice and option while still allowing someone to drive or walk by a missing middle housing unit and not even know that it's there. Additionally, the Planning Department will develop strategies and potential code reforms to facilitate the redevelopment of existing platted small lots and other potential housing sites with appropriate housing of appropriate scale, such as surplus public lands and potentially tax-seized properties. The Planning Department will continue to build and develop relationships with partner agencies and nonprofits to facilitate the development of attainable housing in Prince George's County. And the Planning Department believes that the activities that we've outlined here will be effective in directing new development into the centers and catalyzing redevelopment inside the Beltway. Each of the strategies presented here will take time, but the Planning Department is committed to working collaboratively with the County Council and partner agencies to take on the task and make Plan 2035 goals a reality. On behalf of Katina and the Planning Department, thank you for your time today, and we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you for an excellent presentation. I have a couple quick questions. In terms, and I think the recommendations make a lot of sense because we really want to incentivize transit-oriented development. Question I have, if we eliminate the DSP process, and it's by right, so somebody can come into Hyattsville and put up a building with 150 to 200 units per acre. Who decides if that's a good project, if there's no DSP? They just go get a building permit?
Well, of course, there would still be a review in the planning department, and we feel like the current ordinance that would allow those types of densities has protections and high-quality development regulations built into it to where we would be able to provide feedback and get a quality product for development. Additionally, when the county council, I believe last year, passed the requirement that development has to be compatible with the underlying master sector plan, we believe that we have a robust review process in place that would allow us to ensure a quality development. There would still be a level of review.
Well, my understanding is that Park and Planning has not yet in the past year found that any DSPs were in conflict with the master plan, and I believe we have an amendment to CB 15 that's been floated to drastically change or eliminate, I think change that requirement. So I'm not sure that the master plan, plus the master plans in many cases are out of date, probably less so in the transit areas. You know,
Well, that's exactly right. In the transit areas, most of the master plans are either up to date or will be up to date very soon as we're working on finishing up the West Hyattsville plan. We're working on the Port Towns plan. We're also working on the Blue Line Corridor plan. But what I would say, in reference to your comments about, we haven't found any projects that were not consistent with the plan, what you're seeing when you see it is kind of the end of the process. There's a lot of times that there's a lot of back and forth with the developers about how to achieve consistency even before it gets to the planning board for an approval process. And that's where that behind the scenes work really gets us to the point where we can say that it's compatible with the plan.
okay. I'm just trying to think. I'll look at my district. So my district abuts the Greenbelt Metro Station. It's probably closer than even District 4 to the Metro Station, even though it's in District 4. And I know that they have a height limit issue that goes back to the 90s. If someone came in and said, I want to build a 20-story building right on top of the Metro Station, which would make a lot of sense. I'll probably get yelled at from people in College Park, but a very tall building right on the Metro Station, it'd be like Silver Spring or something, or Crystal City. If it's by right and there's no DSP, I know there's supposedly neighborhood compatibility standards, but what I'm seeing is because Park and Planning has the Hollywood Park, I think it's Hollywood Park, whatever it is, North College Park, Park and Planning property there, would the homeowners who are closest get any notice and have any vehicle in which to raise concerns about neighborhood compatibility issues?
I'll defer to James Hunt to answer the question.
Thank you so much. For the record, James Hunt with the Development Review Division. So to answer your question about that, there are no requirements as of today when it comes to those applications because they would go to permitting. They have to get the preliminary plan of subdivision, of course. But after that, they would go to permitting and they would have to adhere to those neighborhood compatibility standards as well as any other standards within the zoning ordinance. But there's nothing built in the zoning ordinance as of today that would require public notice when those do happen.
Okay, I mean, I understand why we want to speed the process. I can just imagine the screaming that's going to occur when a skyscraper starts going up. I mean, I'm not intimately familiar with the Hyattsville situation, but I know there's been, we've had as a district council a number of concerns about transit-oriented development in Hyattsville. The Clay property, the Suffrage Point You know, so if those types of projects were to occur and there was no public input or public notice, it's good for getting things done. It also sounds like a recipe for extremely unhappy people.
Absolutely, I would agree. I think that it's an opportunity there to provide public notice in those situations, and that could be something that could be thought out as a part of this whole entire process. I think we would definitely be open to that, but adhering to having the opportunity there for the DSP process to kind of be omitted out of there is I think a good idea, or we think is a great idea. At the same time, provide the citizens of Prince George's County the opportunity to request a public hearing or to provide more information about this case would be an opportunity as well.
Yeah, so one of the items of the new zoning ordinance is the pre-application neighborhood meeting, but if there's no DSP, is there a pre-application neighborhood meeting for?
Not for-
Actually, so let me back up. What would somebody file under this proposal? A building permit?
This would be a building permit. It'll be preliminary plan and then building permit after that.
Okay, so there would be notice of the preliminary plan, but those are not the kind of issues that people are going to want to deal with. That's APF and lots and setbacks and those types of, is stormwater management is part of that?
That's right. Katina Scholars. So they would follow the building permit, and the only thing that's required are the necessary accompanying documents. There's stormwater management, there's sediment erosion control, tree conservation plan, landscape plan, and building, all the building code stuff that they're required to submit. And so park and planning would have some involvement in the permit review, but not at the level of a detailed site plan. And so all of those requirements that come along with filing a zoning related application, they would not be subject to those.
Right, so there's no pre-application neighborhood meeting in that
No.
case.
Correct.
I do know that currently, believe for stormwater management projects, the applicant is required to give a notification for those, but it's only tied to that application. I'm not sure if it's tied to the actual permit,
Okay.
grading permit.
And just as a comment, two comments. One, public safety mitigation, I don't think we ever find anything in public safety is not meeting the APF, so we don't do mitigation. I think there's been like one case in which mitigation came up.
Not recently, there hasn't been. There are some projects from prior failures that are still in progress, but not recently.
Okay.
I'll update you as that.
I don't think you need to update us. It's just we're talking about it, but at the moment it doesn't seem to be all that relevant an issue. In terms of APF for transportation in centers, I've said this to staff before. I think that's a really good idea to eliminate that. Although not eliminate it. Fee in lieu that goes to bike pedestrian improvements. Now, if we want to get rid of fees because we're trying to facilitate, then maybe we don't do that. But on the other hand, taking away the APF, the normal APF, and doing fee in lieu for improvements, that has its attraction too. That's just my personal opinion. Because at the end of the day, I think improving pedestrian access is probably the better way to spend our money and to have the builders spend their money. There's Mr. Olson.
Yeah, thank you. I would echo the concerns about the, eliminating a DSP. We want to get TOD going quickly, and but if the project is, the council member doesn't have to pull it up if they're cooperating. If the development meets meets what it's supposed to and looks as it's supposed to and functions as it's supposed to, the community should be relatively happy about it, and then it doesn't get pulled for review. So I am concerned about going straight to a building permit. I'll just put that out there. I think we could run into some significant problems if not. There may be other ways to kind of cut time down, and I'm for that, and I'd love to explore that, with you. Another question about the small lot development. We've actually seen some, and I think a lot of you know this. We've seen some real problems under the new ordinance where developers have been coming into neighborhoods and working to build on these undersized lots that have never been buildable before, putting them between houses where the residents have always known that they're not buildable, and I'm for looking at planned communities of smaller houses on smaller lots that are planned and sort of figured out ahead of time. But I don't think that just building on smaller, undersized lots is the answer. I think that's actually going to create a lot more problems. So, yes to looking at plan. So, and I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about. Are you talking about like planned communities of smaller houses?
Well, what I would say on that is the planning department does recognize that a lot of these older historic lots that were platted long before we had subdivision regulations are an asset and an underutilized asset to increase housing in the county. But your concern is definitely heard, and one of the things that we want to do is make sure that any development that goes on these small lots is compatible with the surrounding development around it. And so as a part of that, what we would be looking for is not just a blanket allowance to allow anyone to build whatever they want on one of these lots, but to have some guidelines and some regulations in place that could potentially reduce or restrict size or restrict scale or restrict massing to ensure that the product that's being built on those smaller lots would be compatible with the development that's around it.
Yeah, so I mean we're going to be looking at this soon, but I mean I do think we should look at planned communities of smaller houses. I think that's where the direction we should be looking at.
I agree with you. One of the and that's something that we certainly can do. One of the things in the missing middle housing study, or following up to the missing middle housing study that we do want to do, is get an inventory countywide of these smaller lots. Now, of course, some of the difficulty in doing planned communities of, and what I'm assuming that you're talking about is massing a large amount of these small undersized lots. There's different ownerships, there's different there could be tax liens on different properties, so actually assembling them all into a larger parcel is not an impossible job, but it's a very difficult job, but it's something that we could look at.
Yeah, and there are parcels that are sometimes a couple acres that could facilitate that type of a thing that are under unified control, but yeah, that's a further conversation. I wanted to ask about, I do want to echo Mr. Dernoga's comment about, investment in bike PHED infrastructure, when development comes in and making sure that there is, I passed a bill and Mr. Berlage knows about that, you all know about it, with the creating the nexus between off-site improvements for bike PHED. I don't want to lose that opportunity because we have gotten a lot built, by using that. So I think we have to make sure that we are, ensuring the developers do get people to and from their development on bike and on foot. There's a lot of improvements we need to make throughout the county, especially in our, more urban areas and our transit areas. So developers should be paying and should be developing and building that type of infrastructure. Similarly, parks and green space. You had talked about, in New Carrollton, making sure that we're getting the parks and green space, on Ellen Road and other areas. And that is something that, we need to make sure is happening, as we create density, that we have communities that are, green and have the right amount of time. We're going through tree canopy now, but that have green space that are walkable. That we have the appropriate park amenities as well, pocket parks and things like that. So I appreciate you're looking at that. One question, and I could probably do this offline, but this is my last question. As we look at New Carrollton, so I'm actually focusing a lot on the Annapolis Road corridor right there at New Carrollton, sort of between Veterans Parkway and the Beltway. And I don't believe that's governed by the plan, the transit, the TOD plan, right? Or does it go up to that? I forget.
I think the Annapolis Road corridor is just outside of that.
So, I mean, this is parochial to District 3, but it is also very important for the whole county. We should probably be looking at how I know we had the Central Annapolis Road corridor plan, but I think I don't think that's a plan. I think it's more of a study. We can talk offline about it too, but I want to make sure that corridor, as it's redeveloped, is redeveloped into the wide sidewalks, the buffers between the curb and the sidewalk, the planted areas, protected bike lanes, those types of things that we have in other places, and I think we need to make sure that that's in place now.
And I don't want to misspeak, but I think that's one of the strategies we recommended in the CIP program, right, Scott?
Okay.
And so
great.
we understand that it's important for that Annapolis Road corridor to connect with a nexus to New Carrollton.
Right.
Obviously, there's some challenges there. Topographical, there's a big elevation difference, but it's not impossible. And so that is one of the things that we're going to be championing and advocating for from the planning department.
Okay. Yeah. Anything we can do to and I know plans take time, but to quickly, if there's anything we can do to add it to, the existing plan or something like that, just to make sure that we get it done right as development comes in. I'm working hard to attract development there, so I do think we're going to be seeing development going on, redevelopment happening relatively quickly. So I want to make sure we don't lose opportunities. And we can talk more offline.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins?
I have what I believe is a very light question for you. You spoke about, first of all, thank you for a very informative presentation. You spoke about construction of high-quality bus structures, street retrofits. I'm just curious. I should have asked this question and should know the answer to it. Although these are recommendations, is parking planning and conversations with our Department of Public Works and State Highway, just how all this will come into play?
Yes, sir, absolutely we are. Scott Rowe, who is out here, is our liaison to both SHA as well as to DPW&T. He's also leading the charge on the Go Prince George's Master Plan of Transportation, and he also worked with them very closely on the planning department's recommendations to the council for the CIP. So we regularly communicate with them, and we're working with them to identify strategies and potentially funding and grants that could allow for some of these projects to move forward.
Okay, thank you. I see Scott Rowe out at a lot of the community meetings, so he's one of the ones you should have.
Scott's hard to miss, isn't he?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Uriata?
Again, thank you for your presentation. Always good to see you. Just a few quick questions. I was trying to figure out with some of the, public safety and behavioral health, school surcharges, et cetera, what's the distance that they can be waived from transit oriented, specifically for the public safety?
I don't have the answer to that right in front of me, but I'll get that answer to you.
Okay, thank you. And so going through the presentation, and maybe this was the focus area and there's another way to see the difference. It seems like the focus is a lot around development from the perspective of housing. And is that like the intention, or is this supposed to be development that's all encompassing, also kind of thinking about more from a business side too? And I say that because, as we know, we are sadly a bedroom community in Prince George's County. Like, that is where our bread and butter is. And I do know like commercial space and development is changing, but there's like an infrastructure around like restaurants and nightlife that we see like in DC and Virginia that we just haven't really capitalized in the same way in Prince George's County. So is that supposed to be in here too, or is this more of a housing focus?
So especially when we talk about in our transit districts and our mixed use areas,
Right.
It really is that mixed use. You're talking about ground level retail, restaurants, dining and nightlife with the residential on top. I'll just use the Blue Line Corridor as an example. You know, as part of that plan effort, we commissioned a market study to really look at the market for things like a grocery store and for other high-end retail. And so we did that both for Blue Line and we did that for Port Towns. And both times the market study came back and said, which was a little hard for me to believe, but there was not enough residents within that area to support that type of commercial growth. And so by capitalizing on the possibilities for increased and enhanced density directly around our metro stations, it grows the population. It can bring in folks who are making a little bit higher dollar, especially along the Blue Line and along our other lines, you know, where folks may be commuting out to the district or maybe commuting to Virginia for jobs, but choosing to live in Prince George's County. And so with those residents comes more money, more disposable income, and that's attractive to businesses, which would essentially use those spaces, those mixed-use spaces on the bottom of the building and attract new commercial development. And then outside of that, of course, you would see ancillary development. And just in your district, I know, time and time again, what we've heard from the Blue Line Corridor folks is that we need a grocery store. It's a food desert. We understand that. And so we believe that items like this that will increase density, get more heads in beds, as they say, could help us accomplish those goals. So it's all tied together a little bit.
And one of the things that we saw in some of the new developments that did have like retail at the bottom, we're seeing like that space stay vacant for long periods of time. And then sometimes, because there was one project that came to me where it had it written in that it could also switch those bottom units if they didn't get retail space, and it would become a full like apartment building. So are there recommendations on how we safeguard from that from happening and making sure that even if it takes time, that we keep those bottom levels specifically for retail?
Well, I think that's what we're doing in the planning department. We're really insisting that those commercial spaces be put in. I was in New Carrollton just the other day on a ULI event, and very similar situation in one of the new multifamily unit buildings that's over there. There is a space that's specifically set aside, and if you walk into it, you think, my God, my goodness, this looks like something that a Starbucks or a coffee shop would be in. But right now, they're just using it as kind of a resident space, you know, with a little snack bar there that's kind of pay your own way. And when I was talking to that developer who had built that project, I said, what's your plan for this? And he said, well, when the market's not there yet, but when the market gets there, we would like to get this space to be a commercial space, like a coffee shop or a small restaurant or something. So I think what we understand is that the market is getting there, it's just not there yet. And I think our developers who build these projects are seeing that potential. So it's really just advocacy on our part, insisting on those mixed use components when we get into these developments and making sure that they're there and ready for when we get enough heads in beds.
And is there a way when we're like approving a project where it can be set in stone that it has to be used that way, like it can't revert back to residential? Because that was one of the concerns I had. They said that it's set for commercial, but if they don't get a tenant, it will become, you know, first level tenant space.
I don't think that there's any requirement in the code right now, and that's something that we could certainly take a look at in the future as part of this effort, because it is very important that we have those commercial spaces.
Right. Because I guess that's just like the one concern I have, that to your point, if the market doesn't bear it currently, and we approve a lot, especially around the Blue Line Corridor, and they see, well, you know, we can create X more units, that they'll yield towards that, and we'll lose the opportunity for those commercial spaces when the market does bear it.
Absolutely, and that's something that we can take a look at, and happy to work with your office and take a look at it.
Perfect. Thank you.
You know how to get me.
Yeah.
I got two questions, but Ms. Uriata, heads and beds has been the excuse forever. Even though we have almost 1 million heads, we don't have the right heads. I mean, when you read between the lines, that's really what's going on. So the development community keeps demanding more and more density everywhere in the county, but no matter what density you bring, they can't bring quality retail. I mean, this has traditionally been a problem. I mean, literally 2003, 4, 5 heard the same thing. And I know, like at Westphalia, that's what Ms. Begay's hearing. Even though there's so many people in the general area. So I'm not sure what to say. I mean,
Well, you're right.
I know you're repeating what they say, and they said the market's not ready, and we need more beds.
It's not just heads and beds. You're absolutely right. You also have to have quality public spaces where people want to visit. You also have to ensure that people feel a level of safety when they're going there. You're also having to make sure that, just what you said, that the people who are in those beds also have an appropriate amount of disposable income where a retailer or a restaurateur feels comfortable going into that area, that they're going to be able to have folks who have disposable income to spend dollars in their establishments. So heads and beds is, I would say, the most important factor, but it is not the only factor. You're absolutely right. And that's why we've looked at a comprehensive package.
Real quick, combining detailed site plan and subdivision, I thought that occurs now. It does not occur now?
It can occur now. It does not occur now.
It can, but it doesn't.
Right.
Because this is on the slide. We need to combine these, but I think you can combine them.
Right. It would not take additional legislation to combine those.
Yeah, I thought that was really one of the applicants' choice.
I don't know that we have anything in place, but I'll check in with James on that. And
I just heard about a case that some people are concerned about this moving forward with a preliminary plan and a site plan at the same time. So I just heard that yesterday. Yeah. Okay. Last, when your capital funding pages, sounds great. I'm glad to see that we're, like I said previously, I'm glad to see we're moving forward analyzing this. So the question is, for the slide that you had that talked about the need for certain capital improvements in certain transit centers, does the current county CIP proposal contain funding for these, or which one? You can answer briefly now, but I think we ought to see a memo saying, you know, for downtown Largo and New Carrollton, here's what we're recommending be done, and here's what's funded, and here's what needs to be funded. It's one thing for us to talk about it.
Absolutely right.
But we need to take the talk from PHED and have it with the full council and the county executive as part of the budget, just on negotiations.
For the record, Scott Rose, Community Planning Division. Yeah, when we came to present this last month to the whole council, the CIP list, Councilmember Olson brought that very issue up. So we're looking at all of the recommendations, looking at the new proposed capital budget, seeing what's in there, talking to the agencies, what's in there, what's buried in a program somewhere, and then identifying which ones haven't, and we'll bring that back to you.
Okay, that'd be very helpful. It was really smart.
Yes.
It was high quality questions. Okay, I think we're good. It's 1 o'clock. We're going to hold up HHSPS if we go any further. Once again, thank you for an excellent presentation, very thoughtful, very detailed, a lot of good ideas, some that need a little work, but they're good ideas. So thank you very much. Any last words that you'd like to convey?
Just a reminder that we'll be back next month to talk about outside the Beltway and outside of centers.
Great. Thank you. With that, PHED is adjourned. Motion for adjournment?
Second.
All in favor?